Alrighty guys, welcome back. So today we are talking specifically about carbon, the chemistry of carbon. And so again, that idea like, why are we studying chemistry and biology? Well, all of life is built around carbon. Carbon is actually a pretty cool atom. It is able to form 4 covalent bonds, and so it can form large, complex molecules that have a variety of bonding patterns. And so in our cells, we are mostly water, but we also have quite a bit of us that are carbon compounds, such as carbohydrates, lipids, or fats, proteins, and nucleic acids, like your DNA and RNA. About 3% left over is salts, so potassium, sodium, chlorine, things like that. And so this is typical for an animal cell. A plant cell will probably have a little bit higher percentage of water, but basically, your cells, why the water component is so important that we talked about is that you are a big water balloon. All of your cells are little water balloons. The other part of us that's so important is all this carbon chemistry that's going on, all of this organic chemistry. And so with organic chemistry, we mentioned earlier, you are an organism, you are organic, and this term organic refers to having a carbon compound. So a compound that is based around carbon atoms. They typically also contain hydrogen, usually oxygen also, but not a have to, but carbon, hydrogen. And so here we're looking at 4 structures. This is all showing the same molecule of methane. And so again, we have a carbon center with 4 hydrogen atoms. And so these are all 4 covalent bonds. And carbon has a unique way of how it bonds. So it has its primary position up top, and then its second, third, and fourth positions are on the bottom. It kind of makes this prism effect, and so it's a very strong, stable structure. This is showing the valence of different atoms commonly found in organic compounds. And so we have a hydrogen, it can only form 1 bond, oxygen can only form 2, nitrogen can form at most 3, but carbon can form 4 covalent bonds. And so that's kind of like why carbon is super awesome, is that it has this incredible bonding power. If you look at a periodic table, just below carbon is silicon, and so it has a similar bonding capability, and so that's why the hypothesis is out there that if we were to find an alternate version of life, that it could be silicon-based instead of carbon-based. Haven't found it yet, it's just a hypothesis. So this is showing you kind of the different ways that carbon can be used in bonding. So we have a very simple methane model here. Then we build on it. So we get an ethane molecule, so we have 2 carbons, each holding on to 3 hydrogens. And here we have ethene, where we have a double bond between the 2 carbons. And so carbon's able to do a lot of different variations. So hopefully you've read a little bit. You've probably read about Stanley Miller's experiment with abiotic synthesis. And other experiments have gone on to show the ability of organic compounds to form without the presence of cells. And so there is a video link on this next slide. So click on that video. It's about 10 minutes. Look at it, watch it. I'll also post this link on the website so you can click and watch on it separately. So when we think think of carbon compounds in organic chemistry, many people who study organic chemistry study specifically hydrocarbons. This is things, people who work for Exxon and Shell, they are all studying hydrocarbons. And so hydrocarbons are our fossil fuels. In our body, they are primarily lipids, fats. But for us, we use fats as energy storage. And so when we take oil out of the ground and we use it in, we process it into gasoline or diesel, and we use them as combustible fuels. And so there is a lot of energy stored within hydrocarbons. And so fossil fuels are organic. They come from the decayed bodies of organisms that lived a long time ago. So think about dinosaurs and stuff like that. Actually, most of our hydrocarbons have come from little microscopic sea creatures, little different protist guys. But we like to think of the dinosaurs, I guess. So hydrocarbons, if you go on to study hydrocarbons, for organic chemistry, that'll definitely set you up for the field of working for Exxon and Shell and Halliburton and stuff like that. Hydrocarbons are nonpolar and hydrophobic. They are extremely stable, and there is not much interaction between each different molecule, but they are, again, packed full of energy. And so some hydrocarbons that you might be familiar with are like propane. If you cook with propane gas on your grill, that's what propane is. Butane, if you have a butane lighter that you use to light, take for a campfire or whatnot. These others are probably less familiar. Another important part of carbon chemistry are isomers. And so these are compounds that have the same molecular formula but a different structure. And so these three molecules at the bottom all have 6 carbons. They all have the same amount of hydrogens, but they are very, very different molecules and will react differently within the body. And so you can have structural isomers that have a completely different arrangement, which is what we have here. You can have cis-trans isomers that are bonded similarly, but they have a different spatial arrangement, so maybe it curves up or down, things like that, instead of being straight. You can have enantiomers, which are isomers that are mirror images. And again, depending on the chemical compound, it could have a very different effect on the body. And we are particularly concerned with this when it comes to pharmaceuticals. And so here we are looking at isomers. These are stereoisomers. And so we have kind of a right and left version of the same compound. And so on the left-hand side is the active good medicine called L-Dopa, and because it has this L-alanine in it. So this is able to be used by the body for proteins. This helps in the treatment of Parkinson's disease and other neurological disorders where messages are not crossing synapses properly. However, the D-alanine, or the D-Dopa, is non-reactive. And so if a person gets medicine that's primarily consisting of the D-Dopa, it is not going to be very effective as the same dosage of the L-Dopa. And so pharmaceutical companies have to be very careful about purifying their medications, making sure that as much active ingredient is present and has very little contamination with an inactive form. Now, I don't know if this is true, but there's this kind of thing out there that that's why generic medicines are cheaper than the name brand, is that maybe the generic version doesn't go through the same purification process, so maybe you're not getting as much active ingredient as you would be if you bought the name brand. Again, it's just kind of a thing, so I don't know if it's true or not. So unfortunately, there are forms of medications that, if not purified correctly, can have very bad effects on either that person or for their unborn child. And so in the 50s and 60s, this drug was prescribed basically to help with morning sickness. And if the person took the purified version, then their children would be fine. You know, it helped with morning sickness, no bad long-term effects, everything was good. However, if any of the dosages were contaminated with the stereoisomer, it caused severe birth defects in the fetus. And so all of these children are a result of a pharmaceutical company not going through the extra step of purifying a medication. It is costly, it's time consuming, but it's a necessary step. And so that's where a lot of pharmaceutical companies come into this quandary about, well, is it really worth our time developing this drug if we have to put it through this extra processing step than if we go and make this other drug that we really don't have to purify? And so that's why a lot of drugs, a lot of medications, they'll go through maybe one or two processes of the test, of the trials, and then they'll just get thrown out because it's just too costly to go all the way through the whole process to make sure you have a viable product at the end. We are going to talk briefly about functional groups. And so we have here an example of functional groups. So at the bottom here, this is ethane. It's C2H6. Over here, though, we have ethanol. So we have C2H5 and an OH group added on at the end. And so this one OH group affects the whole property of ethane and converts it from a gas into a liquid. And so ethanol is the active ingredient of alcohol. And so we are going to be talking about these functional groups. This is just a few. This is not all of the functional groups, but these are ones that are particularly biologically pertinent. And so just for an example, how a functional group can affect a molecule. So here we have an OH group, that hydroxyl group, versus just a double bonded O. And so this difference is what makes testosterone different from estrogen. And so they have very, very different impacts on the body. And so it's just a few different things can completely change around how this molecule works. So here's OH. This is that ethanol we were looking at. So it's an alcohol group. This typically gives molecules an OL ending, so ethane to ethanol, propane to propanol, methane to methanol. And so, again, ethanol is the active ingredient in rubbing alcohol or alcohol that would be in a beer, wine, things like that. A carbonyl group is where a carbon is double bonded to an oxygen. If it happens at the end of a molecule, this is called an aldehyde. But if it happens in the middle of a molecule, it's called a ketone. And again, this has different biological effects about the placement of the double bond and how it will react in the body. A carboxyl group, I typically think of acids, carboxylic acid, C double bonded O to an OH. This is basically found in lots of different acids. So here at the end here, this is acetic acid or vinegar. So we have that COH group. This is also found in fatty acids and amino acids, so lipids and proteins. Here is an amino group. It's a nitrogen with 2 hydrogens. And this is again found in amino acids. And so all of our proteins have this amine group in them. Sulfhydryls are also found in proteins. They help to stabilize the tertiary structure of a protein. We'll talk more about that later. So it's a sulfur bonded to a hydrogen, and this compound is called a thiol. Phosphates are incredibly important to many different biological molecules. So for energy transfer, ATP, GTP all have that phosphate group, so it means adenosine triphosphate, so it has 3 phosphate groups. So it's a phosphorus that's bonded to 4 oxygens. It is highly reactive. This is also what makes up the backbone of our DNA, and so it is found in many different places within every single cell of our body. Very, very, very important compound. And we're actually going to stop there for now. So make sure you watch the video, be reading, and I'll see you guys soon.